In 1994, a Wall Street bank was brought down by its own recording system. Not a whistleblower, not a leaked document. A routine phone tap that was supposed to just settle trade disputes ended up capturing employees admitting, on tape, that their own client would never understand how badly they were being fleeced. This is the story of Bankers Trust, the derivatives machine that made a fortune confusing its clients, and the tapes that finally caught up with it. By the early 1990s, Bankers Trust wasn't a household name like Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley, but inside the industry, it was legendary. Under Chairman Charles Sanford, the bank had deliberately walked away from old-fashioned commercial lending and reinvented itself as a derivatives powerhouse, selling complex financial contracts that promised to help corporations manage risk on interest rates, currencies, and commodities. It worked spectacularly well, at least on the bank's own books. By 1994, derivative sales made up nearly three-quarters of the bank's first-quarter profit, roughly $114 million in a single quarter from that business alone. The problem was, some of the products were so mathematically complicated that even the bank's own clients had no independent way to check whether they were being told the truth about them. In November 1993, Procter Gamble, yes, the soap and diaper company, wanted a cheaper way to manage its borrowing costs. Bankers Trust pitched them something called a leveraged interest rate swap, a contract whose payout was tied to a formula involving 5-year and 30-year treasury rates. On paper, it looked like a modest tweak to a normal hedging tool. In practice, it was a bet, and a highly leveraged one, dressed up in language designed to look routine. Here's the key detail. These swaps were so customized that they didn't trade anywhere else. There was no market price to compare against. Bankers Trust used its own internal computer models to calculate what the contracts were worth, and then simply told clients like P&G what the number was. The client had no independent way to verify it. They were trusting the same bank that profited from the deal to also grade its own homework. In February 1994, the Federal Reserve started raising interest rates faster than almost anyone expected. For a normal hedge, that's manageable. For a leveraged swap built to punish exactly that kind of move, it was catastrophic. By April, Procter & Gamble was forced to take a $157 million charge to unwind its position. And P&G wasn't alone. Gibson Greetings, a greeting card company based in Cincinnati, had entered into 29 separate derivatives transactions and amendments with Bankers Trust over about 3 years, generating $13 million in revenue for the bank and losing tens of millions of dollars themselves along the way. Some of these contracts had names that sounded almost like inside jokes: a ratio swap, a periodic floor, a spread lock, something literally called a wedding band. When a reporter later asked Bankers Trust's own chairman what a wedding band swap actually was, he had to defer to a technical expert. Mead Corporation, a paper manufacturer, separately took a $12 million charge, closing out its own leveraged swap with the bank. Suddenly, it wasn't one unlucky client, it was a pattern. Ordinary companies that thought they were managing risk had instead been sold products they had no real way to understand from people who did. During litigation, lawyers for Gibson Greetings and P&G got access to Bankers Trust's own internal phone recordings, tapes the bank routinely made to settle trade disputes. Buried among thousands of hours of recordings were conversations from 1993 and 1994 in which Bankers Trust employees discussed, candidly and among themselves, that a client would never be able to figure out how much money the bank was actually making off them. Another recorded call captured staff worrying privately about misleading information the client was receiving weeks before the losses became public. In December 1994, the SEC and the CFTC jointly settled charges against Bankers Trust's securities arm over its dealings with Gibson Greetings, finding the bank had provided misleading valuations and inadequate risk disclosures. Bankers Trust paid a $10 million civil penalty, a relatively small number, but a landmark one. It was one of the first times regulators had formally sanctioned a major bank specifically for how it sold derivatives to a client, rather than for the products themselves. Procter Gamble sued Bankers Trust directly, seeking to void the contracts entirely and alleging fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. Gibson Greetings sued too. The cases eventually settled. P&G ended up paying only a fraction of what it technically owed, and Gibson settled its own dispute for a fraction of its outstanding obligation. For Bankers Trust, the message was clear even without a courtroom verdict. Its derivatives franchise, once its biggest profit engine, was now its biggest liability. In June 1996, after an 18-month investigation, an independent counsel's report sharply criticized senior management under Chairman Charles Sanford for allowing lax internal controls across the derivatives business. The report painted a picture of a sales culture that prioritized short-term revenue over honest disclosure. Collectively, corporate clients had lost more than $200 million. You'd think that would be the end of the story. It wasn't. In 1999, well after the bank had spent years publicly rebuilding its reputation, Bankers Trust was hit with an entirely separate scandal, this time with nothing to do with derivatives at all. Prosecutors found that employees in its client processing business had been quietly diverting unclaimed customer funds, money that legally should have been returned to clients or escated to state governments after a period of dormancy, and using it to cover the bank's own operating expenses and inflate its reported revenue, then falsifying internal records to hide exactly what they'd done. In March 1999, Bankers Trust pleaded guilty to 3 federal felony counts of falsifying bank records and agreed to pay a $60 million fine. 3 of its executives were criminally indicted. For a bank that had already spent years trying to rebuild its reputation after the derivatives scandal, a second criminal guilty plea in the same decade was close to a death blow. Later that same year, Deutsche Bank acquired Bankers Trust for roughly $10 billion. At the time, the largest acquisition ever of a U.S. bank by a foreign one. It was less a triumphant merger and more a quiet absorption. Within a few years, the Bankers Trust name had essentially disappeared from Wall Street altogether. The Bankers Trust scandal became a foundational case study in how derivatives should and shouldn't be sold. It pushed regulators and corporate treasurers alike toward demanding independent valuations, clearer risk disclosures, and genuine suitability standards before complex financial products get sold to companies that make greeting cards and paper, not exotic bets on interest rates. The most damning evidence against Bankers Trust was never a whistleblower or a regulator's subpoena. It was the bank's own recording system, built to protect itself, that ended up proving exactly what it had been hiding. If you want more stories of the frauds that quietly rewired how Wall Street gets regulated, subscribe. There's a new one every week.